He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Well, here we are again. It's the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. I'm already talking like I'm in Texas. I'm Jack Heald, the comic relief for this show, and this is Dr. Philip Ovadia. It's his show. Phil, it's good to see you. How you doing?
I am doing well, Jack. Good to see you again, and I am really excited for our guest today. We're going to be maybe changing things up a little bit, although I think the audience will certainly appreciate how what our guest brings to the table is going to help them to stay off of my operating table. And so our guest today is Texas Slim, and Tex and I kind of stumbled across each other as it is in cyberspace a while back, but really have connected. And because what Tex talks about really plays into my messaging about eating whole, real food. And Tex Slim has started a initiative to help people to better source their whole, real food. And I'm going to let him tell the audience a little bit about himself and his background and how he got to where he is. And then we're going to have a really good discussion on the quality of the food you're eating and sourcing the food that you are eating.
I'm looking forward to this one. I really am.
So, Slim, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got to where you are today.
You bet. Good to have you. Good to have me on, guys. Good to see you, Jack.
Good to have
see
you
you,
on.
Philip. A little bit about me. Yeah. A little bit about me. I'm from Texas, seventh generational Texan. I come from small town Texas, up in the Texas Panhandle. I was raised around agricultural and ranching, and it's that part of Texas is the Llano Estacado. It was part of it's the end of the Great Plains. It has a lot of history up here. A lot of people that don't understand. A lot of farming families, a lot of ranching families on the Panhandle, on the Estacado. So what I learned growing up, my grandfather had moved to my side of that side of the family had moved to this part of Texas in the late 1880s, somewhere around in there. I don't know the exact year, but they basically were pioneers. They came here after the Comanche Wars of 1878. Texas was being formed in a new way. There was a movement to feed the nation because there was a lot of cows in the state of Texas. So this part of Texas was very instrumental in that movement. And, there was massive cattle drives. There was massive, movement of our beef industry from Texas all across the nation. Texas began to feed the nation. So there's something about living where I grew up that we have a very close relationship to the soil, to the cow, and to our history and our traditions and everything. By saying that, that was how I was raised. I was raised a very blue collar, a little cowboy, a little farmer, a little bit of everything that is small town Texas. Whenever I was young, I'm kind of migrated up to Austin because I wanted to get out of small town Texas and I wanted to go explore. And I got into certain industries, got into technology, got into research analysis, and went around the world a couple times, traveled, learned how to do some pretty cool skill sets. And this last couple of years, I started really diving into food. I wanted to look at it again. I knew there was problems, but I didn't know exactly where to start. So I've basically done this all my life. I kind of embedded myself into an industry, and it was the harvest industry. And I went out and I went on harvest this year, or 2021, I believe. I went out there and I started connecting dots with our food industry and how it is grown, where it comes from, what kind of contracts are signed, what kind of pesticides are used, what kind of herbicides are used, how much we've genetically modified our seed. I went down basically to the source of the seed of everything, and I started writing about it. And it was called The Harvest of Deception. And I basically just started telling the truth of where we came from. Started with my history of my family, my ancestors, what we did. We survived the Dust Bowl. We decided, we survived the World War II. We survived the going off the gold dollar in the 70s. But each one of these things, as far as decades that passed, there was something new that happened in agriculture. And whenever we look at it now, it's a pretty good correlation with what has changed in agriculture, what has changed in the industry, how we went to a chemical based and a genetically modified based food system with the health of our nation. And we've been able to start putting this together, do some analysis and some research. And a lot of people are starting to talk about it. They're starting to understand that, pure animal protein is how we got here. And we see how they're trying to basically eliminate that out of our diets, and basically the metabolical failure that we've run up to with the fake commodity systems, especially starting early 70s. So that's kind of the long and the short.
I love hearing that story. Each time you tell it, a different part of it sort of jumps out at me. And I think a good place for us to start, our discussion here is, you mentioned how your ancestors, your grandparents, your great grandparents were able to help this country at a time when nutrition was at a scarcity and people couldn't get enough food to eat. And today we find ourselves with the exact opposite problem, that there is an abundance of food, but it is low quality food, and our health is really being threatened by that. And it seems that the answer to our problems once again is returning to, high quality protein sources raised in responsible ways. And I think the initiatives that you're now starting around that are going to be really important to contributing to solving this problem. But I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that. The answer in the beginning was get people more high quality protein sources, and the answer now is get more people more high quality protein sources.
I have a question.
Yeah, it's where do you start? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I just listened to Joe Rogan's interview with the folks who wrote Sacred Cow, and it was eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something in your introduction of yourself that you raised a question I had listening to. I don't remember their names. The authors of
Diana
Sacred
Rogers
Cow.
and Rob Wolf.
It was Diana Rogers.
Diana and Rob. And you raised it again, and so the question is this: you said, and I'm not quoting you exactly, but you said there's a drive to get us off meat. My questions are: who is doing this? What are their motivations? And what evidence do you have that that is the case? And maybe that's a longer conversation. But
well, that's
those are the
pretty
questions
broad. Yeah,
that come
that's
to
a,
mind.
well, and that's what everybody's confused about. And that you can't answer those questions directly, because I have to ask you, what is your understanding of what food is? What is animal protein? That's where we have to start these conversations, is what's the perspective here and the perception, of what we get out of that. Basically, when you say they, well, it's the people that control our food industry. It's the global corporations, that actually do process our food. They do basically, they're the ones that supply the seeds. They're the ones that control the seeds. And there's a process from whenever that seed is planted into the ground all the way until it gets to the grain elevators, then off and, processed. It goes to processing centers. So processing is a big part of it. Most of our processing centers in the United States are globally owned. They're really not, especially with animal protein. Let's just look at that. The animal protein processors in this country, JBS, National, Tyson, and Cargill, most of the three of those are global Brazilian companies. They're not United States companies, and they have the power over processing our food. I believe Diana Rogers brought up and said, okay, what is it about processed food? Well, the more you process food, the more lucrative it becomes, the more regulations you build into it. So you have these global food corporations that, in the beginning started feeding our nation, and they were very good at it. But whenever in 1971 you had Eric Butts of the Nixon administration said, we're going to go big, you're going to go big, or you're going to go home. What did he mean by that? Well, he meant that you're going to have to farm fence to fence with a monocrop. You couldn't grow 4 to 5 different crops now. And that grain and that produce was going somewhere else. It wasn't going to feed your communities anymore. Well, who was they? Well, it's the global food corporations that have been formed ever since, basically, especially after 1970. There's been a consolidation of global food groups in the 90s, in the year 2006 around. 2013, and finally in 2017, there's been very big conglomerates that were formed on an international level. Whenever you say that, it's say, okay, we've got these major food corporations and they do exist. Okay, what is their agenda? Well, their agenda is to make profits, and they have a lot of freaking power to make those profits through subsidies.
I'm losing your signal.
Growing
you said
monocrops.
I'm losing your signal a little bit, Slim. You said their agenda is, and then it
Okay,
broke up. Can you back up and say that again?
Well, their agenda is to make profit. Their agenda is profit driven on basic, but that profit driven is not directed. Where is it directed? Well, it's directed to the global corporations. It's not directed to the communities that it serves. And whenever you're thinking about food, you need to remember the number one thing about food should be the delivery of pure nutrition. It shouldn't be a global plan to basically have profit driven apparatuses that are built into our industrial food supply. And this gets exposed in many ways, because then you look at that, you say, okay, the food supply, let's say agriculture, you look at the medical, you look at the pharmaceutical, you look at the agricultural complex, its impact. All of these companies are basically intertwined with each other, and they're under one big umbrella. And let's look at, okay, chemical companies. Why do you bring up a chemical company? Well, that seed that I told you about is genetically modified by that chemical company, one of those chemical companies. And then it is basically given to the farmer to plant into the soil, which the soil has been killed, because what they make them do is use pesticides and herbicides to grow that genetically modified seed. So you have a chemical company growing your food. And if you do not sign the agreement with a chemical company, then you cannot grow your food. Well, every time you have a pesticide, profit. Every time you have an herbicide, profit. Every time you have a new seed, every 13 months, profit. How many profit points do you need in our food supply? How many touch points are there in our industrial food supply to overprocess? The more you overprocess any type of food, the less nutrition you have, because it's broken down. That's a no-brainer. That's why we say whole foods. So most of our industrial food complex serves basically a food supply that by the time it gets to us has already made its profit, and we become the trash can of the very bad lack of nutrition food that a lot of people call it sludge, whatever it is, depends on what your diet is. But there's a lot of fake commodities that are in that food that we're doing. I did a research on rapeseed, and rapeseed was outlawed in 1956 by the FDA. Well, now it is basically everybody eats canola oil every day of their life. It's a fake commodity. It was not built for human consumption, but the chemical companies made it to where we can consume canola. Most fast food restaurants fry in canola. The dangers of oil. It was rapeseed was actually it was engineered to be an industrial lubricant. That's rapeseed. That's canola. We've been consuming canola ever since the 70s, and that comes from a company called Crisco. Well, Crisco was formed by Procter and Gamble in the late 1800s. What is Procter and Gamble back then? They made candles and they made soap. and they used cottonseed oil. Electricity came along. We didn't have as many people using candles. Procter and Gamble said, we got to use all this cottonseed. What are we going to do? Well, you have Crisco frying oil. And that started basically at the turn of the century of 1900. So you look at the pattern that has happened ever since then. We learned how to basically create consumable oil, whatever you want, a product that they could make into a profit-driven fake commodity. And so we're consuming these fake commodities instead of just consuming whole, good nutrition.
Why do you call it a fake commodity?
Well, why do you need something that wasn't ever built to be consumed? It has no use for consumption, but it is in our agricultural system. It is in our medical system. It is in our pharmaceutical system. Well, the only thing that's true is that it's being leveraged to make profit. It's not being leveraged to give you nutrition. It's a fake commodity. It shouldn't exist. It has no reason to exist. You can get scientists to say, yeah, that's why we have it. But we used tallow before we used Crisco. We had other options. And basically, in the agricultural world, I mean, how we've evolved within our agricultural department, we've lost kind of sight of how we used to do things. And that's why I tell everybody, go back to your grandchildren or your grandparents and see how they did things.
Yeah, and then what the magic really happened, because first these were sold as convenience products, and it was that Crisco was going to be kind of more stable. You could store it longer, and then they basically were able to create a narrative around it that it was somehow improving our health, and yet the evidence is in the complete opposite direction. We now see that since these, foods, since these products have been introduced into our food supply, our health has only deteriorated. And I am yet to see a scientific study that shows that eating more processed foods makes you healthier, or makes you live longer, or avoids any sort of negative health outcomes. But we now find ourselves in a situation where we have this abundance of what's called food, and we really are still lacking in nutrients because, as Slim alluded to, and as Diana Rogers and many others have gone into, the more you process food, the less true nutrients, true nutrition that remains in that food.
Okay, so a summary of the problem statement is, and I want you to correct me here, Slim, if I've got it wrong. The summary of the problem statement is our entire supply chain of food has been subverted away from the end goal of delivering the most nutritious food at the best price to as many people as possible, to a completely different end goal, which is delivering the highest profit to the fewest number of corporate entities as possible. Have I stated the problem well?
Pretty much. I mean, it's a huge problem, but you're definitely on the right path there. I mean, it is a good big conglomeration, and it starts with the seed, and it follows the seed all the way to your table.
I'd like to follow two different lines of thought. Thought number one would be, if I've stated the problem correctly, I'd like to hear proposed solution. But before we actually get to the proposed solution, I'm fascinated to just hear about the chain itself, from the seed to your table. Talk,
Sure.
I realize there's a whole lot there, but just kind of take us through the process of how it used to be before the corruption and what we now have. Just kind of compare and contrast.
Sure. You bet. I've been working on something with a couple of ranchers, and I really have some really good conversations with them. Regenerative grass fed, and anybody that's kind of going back to the soil. But what we're wanting to explain, everything that we're doing with the beef initiative, is we're doing a vertical integration into our food. We're doing a vertical integration. We're starting with the soil. Okay. We're starting with the seed, then to the soil, then to the grass, basically. Okay. From the grass to the cow, cow to producer, producer to processor, processor to supplier, supplier to market access to human health. Therefore, we're creating a new health initiative. So if you look at every one of those touch points that I said, that's how we have to follow the understanding of where our food truly comes from.
Right.
And if we can
right.
kind of identify the source of the seed of every one of those integration points, then you can kind of say, okay, let's look at this a little bit closer. Let's look at the soil. Okay, well, we already know the seed has been genetically modified and it's not the real seed. And it's done for many different reasons. They can have all the explanations and everything. It's a genetically modified seed, that's for sure. Okay, let's look at the soil. Our soil is dead. We've monocropped it and we've burnt it, and we don't have soil anymore. We have topsoil. And a good example, during the Dust Bowl, they here in the Panhandle, it was, this was a big kind of a focal point for it, because it was almost at ground zero. Ground zero, they say, of the Dust Bowl was Boise City, Oklahoma. And so you look at that, and we had Native Americans here. We had people that understood soil back then, and they did ask one of the I believe it was one of the chiefs at that time. They said, "What is wrong with the soil?" And they said, "Upside down." Well, what did he mean by that? Well, the Great Plains is grasslands, and the grass would be a certain length, but the root systems could be 5 to 6 feet down into the ground. And so what he meant by upside down, what we had done is we had basically taken the root system out of everything. We had destroyed the soil, and then you had, crops that went very high, but they had no root systems. And that was something that we turned over and turned over and turned over, and we turned the soil over. Then, we brought the pesticides and herbicides, and then we started torching the soil. And so that's where we are now. So there you go. You have the soil. Okay, where does that go now? Well, let's get back to the seed. We have to get back to the seed of the grass. That is what basically our agriculture is, as far as animal protein is about. It starts with the seed of the grass. The cow is the land tool of that grass. By eating it and grazing on that grass, he is basically he's letting that root system survive to get deeper into the soil to flourish, the grass to grow again, the cow to be fed. And then once we go to the cow, here we go. We got the producer. Okay, well, the producer is a farmer, the rancher, whoever it is. He has to steward that animal. Once he stewards that animal to a certain place, and he needs to find a processor so he can process that cow. Well, at this time, those processors are basically have got the meat industry, handcuffed, because a farmer and rancher he really doesn't even know when he's going to be processing. The date of the processing that he's allowed to do with his cattle becomes the means to the end, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be the health of the cow, the goodness of the meat, but that's already gone out the door. So the processing, how we have on a global standard is not working for us. We have meat price manipulation. They just released, the federal government sued, I believe it was JBS, for $56 million, which is nothing. None of the people that were affected by that will never get the money. So the processing guys, they go off and they say, hey, we made, $500 million off of this. And by getting sued, we only had to pay $58 million. They're going to do that every time. And they, this happens in the meat industry all the time.
Isn't it?
Right. I mean, it just never stops. And they do, a headline, and they say, oh, those guys, they're going to, like I heard last night, I guess they said something about processing on the State of the Union. I don't even listen to that stuff anymore. It's a broken system. And so once you get into the processing, we got to look at processing of your food. Who's processing your food? Do you want it to be somebody that's local? Do you want to be somebody that's a microprocessor that is regional, that actually feeds your local community? So you get the processor, you can go, okay, who's the supplier? Well, that's controlled too by these big food corporations. You don't get market access very easy. And very few people talk about market access of our food. It is controlled by the chemical company on down the line in certain ways that, there's partnerships, there's contracts. So your food supply is really automated in a way on that corporate structure where you have no access to saying, I don't want that processor. I don't want that type of market access. I want something different. But they control with regulations. They would control with labels. They control, with basically certifications, USDA, stamp of approval. There's so many things that are in our food that are basically not leading us to truth of nutrition. It's leading us to high regulation, low value within our nutrition, and low value within our health. And so if we do that vertical integration and looking at our food supply, we're going to be able to answer some questions. We're going to uncover some things, and we're going to say, hey, let's sit at the table and you tell us why this is better than what we're proposing. And by doing that, people have to join the conversation, and they do get very intentional about understanding what food intelligence really is.
Yeah, I have, certainly seen
Wow.
that it's a natural extension, as people start to get more healthy. I know as, I started to take a greater interest in my health, it just becomes natural to start questioning the quality of the food that you were eating. And it invariably leads down the sort of rabbit hole of, finding out all of these things that you've been talking about. And, ultimately that's how, I think we crossed paths and how we came together, and why, our missions have become aligned, and we are now working on, ways that we can, work together to amplify this mission and amplify this message. And, I think one of the things you talk about is basically getting closer to the source of your food. We have become so disconnected from our food. It just shows up in the grocery store or in the restaurant from wherever, and people don't know where it comes from and what the process it went through to get there is. And the more that we can, get closer to that process, go to your farmer's market and talk to the farmers that are raising, the food that you're eating and growing the foods that you're eating. That really has a profound impact on health, it turns out. And so, that's why I think this is such an important message to get out there.
Well, now that we've got the problem statement and an elaboration
and something
on
very important to bring
the
up
scope
real
and
quick.
nature of the problem.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jack.
Are you on a satellite? Is your internet satellite?
No, I'm not. What's that?
We've got latency, and it makes me think you're. I don't know. Anyway, I was just thinking about Elon Musk and his internet, his satellite from the internet from the satellite. What's the? We've stated the problem. We've elaborated on the problem. We are way out of sync here. We'll give it a minute. All right. Let's see if we can get back in sync. So, talk about the solution that you are building. I think the problem's been stated. What's the solution? Yeah, we've lost you again. Okay. Eliminate seed oils and then learn where your animal protein's coming from. All right. Does that lead us pretty naturally to the beef initiative? I'm getting almost nothing here.
Yeah, we're losing you, Tracy.
I'm getting almost nothing here over the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well.
Okay.
Can you try turning your video off? Now I kind of hear you again.
Yeah, let's go.
Try turning your video off and seeing if that will save some bandwidth for us. I think we lost him now, Jack.
Oh boy, it was bad.
Yeah.
Now I know it records locally.
Let's see.
So my hope is that when it's all sewn back together, the local signal will make it work. But I'm missing some significant stuff. All right, Slim, are you there? Yeah.
think we.
Oh, this is
I
frustrating.
know, and it's a great conversation too. We're gonna have to.
Oh,
Let me.
great conversation. I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Let's all bail. This same link should continue to work. Oh God, that's going to be a mess.
Let me see if I can text him and.
Okay, I'm going to pause. All right. Well, while we're trying to figure out what's going on with Texas Slim and his technical problems, I want to make sure that I understand, Phil, what he's saying. And I've read a good bit of his stuff, and I was really looking forward to this conversation to ask him some questions. So, starting from the seed that goes into the ground, that is owned by these big multinational food corporations. The soil itself is compromised, I guess might be the word, because of monoculture farming and all the chemicals that have to get dumped onto these monoculture farms in an attempt to keep them healthy. Those chemicals are owned by, I guess, roughly the same group of companies. The the cattle that are grazing on these lands are getting let's see, so he calls that the cow. Let's see, and then the producer owns the cows, so his job is to try to raise these things as healthy as he can. Looks like Slim popped back in. Oh, hey, there he is. He's back.
All right.
Well, I see him, but I don't hear him.
Yeah, I can hear you all right.
Excellent. All right, Slim. Maybe this is better. I was trying to summarize what I understand. Okay. So we were talking about the proposed solution to the problem. You started with folks educating themselves about the dangers of seed oil, and once you start down that road, you'll eventually end up at meat. So and not just meat, but locally produced food, both I'm sure both meat and fruits and vegetables. I think that summarizes where we are when we lost you. Am I right? Are we on the same page here? Consumption model. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Wow. Yeah.
So it really is. There's so much that we can get into, and we're definitely going to have you back on for part 2, 3, 4, 5 of this probably. But
Yeah.
let's
I
talk
was
a little
thinking the
bit
same thing.
about the beef initiative specifically and what people can be doing now to help them solve this problem for themselves. Because I think one of the challenges that people have is that they may not have access or they don't realize that they have access to locally produced animal protein. And I know one of the problems you're trying to solve with the beef initiative is helping people to figure out where they can source their local animal protein from.
Well, I hope I understand what you're saying. It's both exciting and a little bit overwhelming. Um, and we're dealing with what I hope are only technical issues. So I may also be uh, completely confused. I'm always willing to consider that a possibility. Um, Phil, anything to add before we let Slim go for the day?
No, like I said, I think in the end, it's just very interesting how the quality of the food impacts our health, and whatever we can do to get better quality food to more people is ultimately what is going to help us to recover, to take back our health, as we have talked, so much about on this program. So, Slim, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find the Beef Initiative, and what they can do if they're interested in better, sourcing their animal protein, and if they're interested in sort of contributing to this to the greater movement.
So if folks, will the Kerrville conference be promoted on the Beef Initiative website? And we've lost him again. Okay. Well, we're dealing with enough of this. Slim, I want to have you back on sometime. Phil, I'm trusting you're going to make that happen.
Definitely.
So this is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with special technical problems brought to you by probably the deep state and big agro would be my thought. You can follow Dr. Ovadia on Twitter at iFixHearts, and his website is ovadiahearthealth.com. For Dr. Phil Ovadia and Texas Slim, I'm Jack Heald. We'll talk to you next time. America is fat and sick and tired. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy and at risk of a sudden heart attack. Are you one of them? Go to ifixhearts.co and take Dr. Ovadia's metabolic health quiz. Learn specific steps you can take to reclaim your health, reduce your risk of heart attack, and stay off Dr. Ovadia's operating table.